Okay, so this is what it says on the tin, talking about what we're doing about the local elections, which is, I'm sure you're all aware, are on the 5th of May. Ah, there we go. Right, so the aim of this presentation is to stop the Ark, is to convince you tonight to help STARC and other groups stop the Ark. Is to summarise the background on recent developments, is to explain our strategy of targeting those Ark leaders who are up for election on the 5th of May, and to explain what you can do individually and collectively to help stop the Ark. You got the message. So, background. On July last year, the government launched its public consultation on the Ark, but with no explanation of the need to prioritise. It believes that you could have lots of housing without damaging the environment and generating lots of economic growth, and no understanding, or at least no willingness to share the fact that there was a conflict between those. Because we were so concerned about this, in August running through to October, we launched our own consultation where we asked people what did they think about having the Ark at all. And the response to that was a 90% rejection rate. In November, the government spending review came out, which is the forward financial plan for the government looking ahead for 3 years. And it had no mention of funding for either the Ark or the East-West Rail, as William's just been explaining. There will be small bits buried in the noise for individual departments, but there was no capital, there was nothing labelled the Ark. In February, sorry, that should be 2022, the integrated rail plan came out. Again, there was no mention of East-West Rail, so it's still not coming out. And then also on the 2nd of February, the Levelling Up White Paper was published, which claimed to have a national remit. So it's not just about the Northern Midlands, but there was no mention in it whatsoever of the Oxcam Ark as a concept. However, it does include 3 other things described as innovation accelerators. And if you read all of the papers that David was describing earlier, innovation accelerator is what people were thinking that the Ark was, but suddenly it doesn't exist any longer. And there are even particular statements about diverting more R&D funding away from the southeast towards the Northern Midlands as a specific part of levelling up. So what else? As you heard earlier, South Cambridgeshire County Council revealed that the government is believed to no longer see as a project driven by central government. On the 1st of March, the Ark leaders were asked to consider priorities for a locally led partnership model, but also to develop a joint internationalisation plan, for the Ark with the Department of International Trade. Now, internationalisation, obviously other countries, so who? China certainly has been very much referred to earlier to the need to jump on planes to Beijing, but also you will see a whole series of articles about the amount of Chinese investment around Cambridge in particular, and you will also see some of our favourite property developers such as Savills, who certainly were very much dealing with Russian money until very recently, and they've not yet made a public statement that they've changed that. This produced something of a backlash, and the developers, the investors and the Ark universities all complained to Rishi Sunak that inward investment to the UK was being deterred, and voiced their concerns in the Financial Times so everybody else knew about it. There were other rearguard actions from council leaders such as Bridget Smith. And on the 10th of March, we had a new housing minister appointed, Stuart Andrew, effectively swapped out of the whip's job. It took, not perhaps unusually, a couple of weeks for his formal terms of reference to be noted. So he is still responsible for Oxcam, but the Ark has disappeared. So exactly what part of Oxcam and whether it's different to his predecessor is not yet clear. And we're still waiting. There's no response yet to last autumn's Ark Vision consultation. There is no formal government decision on the Ark, despite lots of analogies of flushing toilets. We're still, as William was saying, looking for this review of the East-West business case, routes and operating pattern that is due by June. And that's in a letter to Richard Fuller, the MP for North East Beds. Inevitably, given the difference in scale, the amount of money involved in upgrading the line between Bletchley and Bedford is orders of magnitude less than to building a new line, which is what they're talking about at the moment between Bedford and Cambridge. There is some diversity of views. There are some companies and universities who want to go it alone and don't really want to wait for the government not to make up its mind. Local councils are more mixed. Some of them are saying, actually, we're going to do nothing else on the Ark until the government does tell us what's going on. Others are still keen to push ahead. So you have people like Pete Marland, who is the leader of Milton Keynes Council, who was quite happy to stand up and say, we definitely need 1 million houses. He thinks they're for our children, but he hasn't yet explained why some of them are being priced in Hong Kong dollars. There is a risk also that the withdrawal of central government support will mean less development. Clearly, less enthusiasm, it's higher risk, all of those sorts of things. But there will therefore be less investment in the other things that matter, particularly infrastructure and services. So you run the risk of perhaps less development, but also of what you do get is even lower quality. So what else are we doing while all of this is going on? We have an action plan for local elections which details a comprehensive set of actions to cancel the Ark and offers better alternative solutions to its issues. And there is a 2-page summary of that as well with the 10 action points. Both of those documents are on the website. If you can't find them, please ask and we will point you in the right direction. They have also been sent to all of the candidates in our target wards that I'll refer to in a minute. As well as the FOI request into central government, we've been doing some into local authorities. So a committee that was chaired by Bridget Smith, who's the leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council, came up with these things called the Ark Environmental Principles, and they're all of themselves not unreasonable things. However, we have not yet found any evidence that any of them had made the slightest difference in practice. No development has been changed, no local plan has been amended, and so on. And part of that is because they have no statutory standing, unlike the National Planning Framework, so that if somebody said, we don't want to do this because it's against the Ark Environmental Principles, the developer would still be able to go and complain to Michael Gove and his ministry saying, well, that developer should go ahead because it's within the legal framework and these environmental principles at the moment are just so much pieces of paper. The other thing that we've seen is that Bucks has exited the Ark Leadership Group. Finland has reminded us they were never part of it. And you've got examples of people like Vale of White Horse who are pausing their work on the Ark pending the government making up its mind. And we are collating all of those at the moment. We've had supporting some of the groups we collaborate with, particularly Williams Group in Cambridge and a similar Vale group in Bedford, which have generated some useful letters to MPs. One of the advantages of getting an MP to write is that the minister has to reply. If you and I write, they can just file it in the round file, but MPs must be replied to. And we've obviously invited people to join STARC as a member as we transition, we now have transitioned to Community Benefit Society. So onto the elections. There are something like 204 council seats up for election on the 5th of May in 8 of the 21 councils across the Ark. We clearly don't have the resources to campaign in that many seats. It's an awful lot of people we would need. However, local authorities have also evolved in the last 20 years or so, and they now have a cabinet-style governance where you have individual senior members of whichever is the ruling party or ruling coalition with specific responsibilities, and in particular that gives their leader much more power, and one or two of them are even more commonly directly elected now. Only Bedford and the Cambridge Peterborough in our area, but it indicates part of the trend. So all of those leaders sit on this thing called the Ark Leaders Council, and they are the voting members of the Leaders Council. People like the universities and so on attend but do not actually have a vote. And the Ark Leaders Council has its own officers or civil servants, depending how you view them, including a CEO, Bev Hindle, we referred to earlier. So what we decided to do was to target the 5 leaders who are members of that Ark Leaders Council who are up for election this time. That comprises 2 Conservatives, 2 Labour and 1 Lib Dem, and therefore that affirms our non-party political status. It perhaps also demonstrates what I've described as the corrosive effect of excessive development on local politics, because somebody coming along saying we want to do something in the way of development generally tends to get support. There are arguments about where and how soon and how much, but in general, local authorities see themselves as being in the business of developing their region, potentially at the expense of other people's regions, and therefore in favour of development. And that's irrespective of their political status. The total number of electors across the 5 wards is just over 24,000. That's less than 1% of the total Ark electorate. And the total majorities for the 5 incumbents at the last election was 2,302. So if 5 more than half that majority, what's that, just over 1,150 people change their minds, they would all lose their seats. Now that's assuming that exactly the right people split across the wards and that there are no other changes in voting pattern, and neither of those are likely to be true, but it's an indicator of just how few people need to change their minds to actually affect the outcome of this. And that will clearly demonstrate voters' rejection of the Ark as a concept, and therefore have serious knock-on effects on its future as a project. It will, in my favourite phrase, become toxic for political parties of all persuasions. So, who are our targets? The aforementioned Bridget Smith in South Cambridgeshire. Her ward is Gamlingay. She's a Lib Dem. Her majority is 104 out of an electorate of just over 3,000. That's her Twitter handle for those who are into Twitter. A couple of things that you can certainly point out. She was on the 10th of March, gave an interview with Radio Cambridge where she said, quote, "The Ark is the only game in town in order to get enough investment to overcome the fact that Cambridge has serious water and other infrastructure problems with its existing development." So that therefore means the only solution to underinvestment at the moment is more development. And clearly the only solution to the fact that that development in turn will be underinvested is yet more development. And you therefore end up until eventually you've concreted over the entire area. That, if you were looking at it from an investment point of view, is what's called a Ponzi scheme. And a Ponzi scheme is fraudulent. And in the same way, that idea is fraudulent both on the taxpayer and on the environment. They also have had the auditors qualify their council accounts as not being able to demonstrate value for money because it's taken them 3 years to produce the accounts from 3 years ago. And literally they were signed off about less than 2 weeks ago. Barry Wood in Cherwell, ward is Frankford and Haywood, Conservative, you can see the numbers there. He doesn't do Twitter, but that's the North Oxfordshire Conservatives. Cherwell doesn't have a 5-year land supply, which makes them very vulnerable to being challenged by developers. He is also the chairman of the Ark Leaders Group and one of its biggest advocates. One of his other quotes is, "The only people who oppose the Ark should go and take a pill." In other words, if you oppose what he thinks, you're either a criminal or you're ill. You may choose to differ. Anna Smith, Labour leader of Cambridge City Council, ward is Coleridge. Again, very small minority, very small majority, rather larger electorate because the 2 it's one ward, but it has 2 councillors. Cambridge at the moment is famous for the fact they're about to literally gold plate one of the river banks. They also, the council, are a joint sponsor of development, not a particularly bad thing in itself, but is actually set, depending on your perspective, a 25% target or cap of that development that they co-sponsor for overseas buyers. And they also, somebody is on record as saying that the only reason they introduced that was because they didn't have enough take-up locally, which makes you wonder why they were building the houses. Next to Ryan Fuller, Huntingdonshire, which confusingly is a district council, his ward, I beg your pardon, that's a typo, it's St Ives, not St Neots. Conservative, another small majority. Again, doesn't do Twitter, but that's the Hunts Conservative Association. Susan Brown, Oxford City Churchill Ward, another very small majority. She does do Twitter. She's obviously sufficiently concerned that she has banned No Expressway Twitter group from accessing her account. There's the figures at the bottom. So, what can you do to help? Join STARC as a member of our Community Benefit Society. You'll then get more involved in what's going on, have the opportunity to talk about what we do and how we do it and so on going forward. Donate time or money or both to help us. Get in touch, particularly if you live in one of the target wards or nearby in one of those 5 councils, or you have friends, colleagues, family who might help. We need information. What are the candidates saying? What's in their leaflets on social media? Where and when are they meeting? Is there an opportunity to challenge them at a meeting? All of those sorts of things are really useful. We are just in the process of printing 15,000 versions of the A5 leaflet, which we want to distribute across those 5 wards. Help in doing so. I know a number of people on this call have already offered to help, and we're very grateful for that. The more the merrier. It's fewer walking around pushing leaflets through letterboxes. And finally, supporting our social media campaigning, especially on Twitter, using those 2 hashtags of Stop the Ark and Vote Out Ark Leaders. We will also have some Facebook adverts running from next week. And please ask questions at meetings or on social media of all of the candidates, but obviously particularly the incumbents.